What's a nice girl like you doing in a place like this?
I have pepper spray, and I swear I'll use it. But I want you to know I understand the Negro people. I understand how you've been chained down by the oppression of white capitalist society.
Yes, well, then you'll understand this.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Real Ripe and Real Rotten. This is a podcast where we look at the highs and the lows of your favorite Hollywood artists. We use Rotten Tomatoes every month to determine the highest and worst rated film in someone's filmography, and then we talk about them. And right now, in the spirit of Halloween, we're going to be talking about Wes Craven. And we're starting off with the worst one, which is going to be Vampire in Brooklyn from 1995. I'm joined by Clay. Clay, how are you? I'm
good. I have a question for you, Wes. Was that you that I heard getting beast fucked?
What was?
That's what when Eddie Murphy was playing the Italian guy. That's what he said that the cop was doing to that woman was beast fucking her, which is not an expression I've ever heard before.
We might be too white to talk about this movie. I think all three of us, despite the fact that I'm black, I think I'm not black enough. But we're also joined by Amanda. Amanda, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Are we ready to talk about Wes Craven? We're doing this because it's Halloween, right? And we decided, the patrons voted. If you're not a patron of the show, you can go to patreon.com/thepenskyfile. And they voted on Wes Craven. Unsurprisingly, I think we're going to have Nightmare on Elm Street, and then we're going to have Vampire in Brooklyn, and we'll pick a B-roll. But we're starting with his worst one, which is Vampire in Brooklyn, which is currently, I believe it's at 10%. It is 10% on Rotten Tomatoes. This film, the critical consensus is neither scary nor very funny. This misguided effort never lives up to its premise, which is kind of a generic thing, but it's a 1995 American comedy horror film directed by Wes Craven, Eddie Murphy, produced and stars in the film. He wrote the film script alongside Vernon Lynch and Murphy's older brother, Charlie Murphy. Vampire in Brooklyn.
Actually, Vernon Lynch is also his brother.
He's a half-brother, yes.
Yeah, he's a half-brother, yes.
Oh. Vampire in Brooklyn's co-stars Angela Bassett, Alan Payne, Kadeem Hardison, John Witherspoon, Zakes Moke, Joanna Cassidy. Murphy also plays an alcoholic preacher and a foul-mouthed Italian gangster. It was released on October 27, 1995.
Can't resist playing multiple characters.
And failed to meet the studio's expectations at the box office. Received negative reviews, regarded as one of Murphy's weakest movies. In later years, however, it earned a cult following among fans for Murphy and Bassett's chemistry, the humor, the musical score, and Craven's direction.
For centuries, they have roamed the earth, fearsome creatures of the night, endlessly seeking to satisfy an unyielding hunger. Now, the world's last vampire is about to encounter something infinitely more terrifying than himself. Brooklyn.
Interesting. I've been stabbed, and I've been hanged. Even broken on the rack once, but I've never been shot before. It kind of itches a little.
Paramount Pictures presents...
No! If you're hungry, I'll run you down to KFC down the street and hit you off with a 2-piece.
I already had Italian.
Eddie Murphy.
Do I look like I would bite you?
Angela Bassett.
You bet not. Not after the day I've had.
Eddie Murphy.
Everything! Come on! Move it! Yeah, right. Hey, there's a lot of love in this room. Look at this.
And Eddie Murphy.
Bottom line, brothers and sisters, what I'm trying to tell you tonight is that evil is good. Let me hear y'all say it. Evil is good. That's right.
If he fails here...
Quickest way to a woman's heart is through the church.
It's actually through the rib cage, but that's a bit messy.
Being undead...
You got the dropsies.
...won't be worth living.
I'm a cop. If you try anything funny, I'll shoot you.
Women.
Vampire in Brooklyn.
I would love to have you for dinner.
let's get into it. I'm going to say I'll start this one off for us. This is not as bad as a 10% movie on Rotten Tomatoes should be.
Correct. Yeah. I felt the same way. This was one that was like notorious as a bad movie that I knew of for a long time, and I can't remember if I'd seen it before. Maybe once a long time ago. So I was looking forward to actually watching this, and it's not really that bad. I think that thing you read at the beginning is kind of accurate, where it's not scary enough to be a horror movie, and it's not funny enough to be a comedy.
Yep. It's flawed. It's got some fundamental flaws to it, I think. But maybe this will be heresy. I enjoyed this in some ways more than I enjoyed Near Dark, watching Near Dark.
Blasphemy.
I think there was like more that was interesting to me.
This is why we're starting our own podcast.
Goodbye, Wes.
I spent this movie where Near Dark, I kind of understood what was going on. I sometimes think that movies that I'm not like really invested in, I find are more interesting to think about like what went wrong with this movie. And I think Vampire fits into that for me. I think this is much better than a 10% movie. I think it has two huge problems going for it.
Just two?
Two big ones, two huge problems. The first one is that Eddie Murphy apparently decided he didn't want to be funny in this movie for whatever reason. And this is, let me ask you guys this first. Where does Eddie Murphy sit for you in terms of like how familiar are you with Eddie Murphy?
I'm fairly familiar with Eddie Murphy. I've seen most of his early years movies and, Delirious and Raw. Pretty much everything after Vampire in Brooklyn, or Nutty Professor, I guess, is probably the last where I draw the line as far as Eddie Murphy movies I've seen. But I'm fairly well versed in Eddie Murphy. Amanda?
I am barely at all. Like, I am aware of him, but yeah, I don't really know much of his work. I kind of just know him as a pop culture figure. I don't really know him, like, by different movies and stand-up and things.
Yeah.
He is my Pearl Jam of actors. Like, he's a huge name that, like, it's kind of bizarre how little I know about him, really. And
that's a good way of putting it. I feel like I want to adopt that phrasing too.
I thought you were going to go the other way and say he's the one actor who, regardless of quality, I will always buy their product.
No, it's the opposite. Like, for the time that I grew up, Pearl Jam has somehow like slipped into this zone of I'm not really. I could barely tell you three things about Pearl Jam. And
sure.
Eddie Murphy is kind of that for me, for how huge he was on SNL and how big of a career he had in the 80s and into the 90s. I've seen a bunch of his movies, but I'm not sure I could tell you anything about Eddie Murphy going into them or like into this movie. And I think that was what was surprising to me about this. He apparently, him and Craven had a big fight during this because Craven said he was difficult, but also he said that Eddie Murphy didn't want to be funny as himself, as his character in this.
Yeah, Charlie Murphy said that it was originally supposed to be a straight horror movie.
A straight horror movie, yeah, which is really strange. And the problem is Eddie Murphy is hysterical and an amazing character actor. Like, yes. he's astounding as the Italian Guido and the preacher guy in this. And I think that's actually my favorite part of the movie, when he plays those characters.
Oh, the preacher sequence is by far the best thing in the movie. That was legitimately funny.
It's legitimately funny. The Guido's a little bit of a less of a point, but we'll get to him. But I didn't know if this was like, I was trying to think of an analogy for this. It would be like if you were a world famous chef and like one night you were just like, fuck these people, I'm making Kraft macaroni and cheese for everybody and they're just going to like it. It's a weird movie for him to kind of take off and like be like, I'm not going to do jokes. One review I saw everyone around Eddie Murphy has to pick up the slack for Eddie Murphy not being funny in this movie.
Yeah.
And that's devastating, I think. But what'd you guys think?
Amanda?
Yeah, I mean, I spent this entire movie confused. Like, not about the plot, not about what was happening, but about what I was supposed to be feeling, what I was supposed to be getting out of it. There were a couple parts where I legitimately laughed out loud. I think when he's the Italian gangster. Yes. And a couple things that, a couple of the interactions between the, what's his name, Silas and Julius, who becomes the ghoul.
Yeah.
There were certain moments. There were certain moments between them that I thought were really funny and charming. But yeah, with Eddie Murphy, like kind of coming from the same place that you are, Wes, where I'm a little ignorant in terms of his work. All I know about him is that he is a comedian and a character actor. So to come into this movie with that expectation and thinking I was going to get some like high camp, Dracula style spoof, and then he seems to play it so seriously and so earnestly that I was just really put off by him in like every scene he was in.
It also makes it really, if you don't know much about Eddie Murphy and you don't know that he is famous for playing multiple characters in the same movie, it's really weird that he just happens to play two other characters in this movie.
Yeah.
They kind of cover it by having it be like, oh, the vampire is turning into this person or whatever, but like you can do that without putting him in all of that makeup to do that stuff.
Yeah.
So if you're coming into this fairly light on Eddie Murphy backstory and oeuvre, I guess is a word you could use. It's really strange that he just decides to play two other characters.
He's unrecognizable as Guido, I would say.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was him until after the scene where they see him out on the street and he comes in. I was like, oh, it's Eddie Murphy. Like he's completely different and he's so good at it and it's so strange. And I think that the preacher and Guido were like Craven forcing him to do something funny in this or something, because they don't feel like they really belong there. They're just done as the excuse to get him to do something that's actually in his skill set.
Yeah, it's funny because the stuff that I was reading about it said there were kind of conflicting things that I saw where it said Charlie Murphy said that it was not supposed to be a comedy, but Wes Craven wanted it to be funnier. And then I read another thing where Wes Craven said that Eddie Murphy was trying wherever he could to make it funnier, and it wasn't supposed to be. So it's a weird, depending on who you ask, it seems like it's a difference of opinion on what did or didn't work.
Yeah. He's working with his family on the script, which I think is another problem of that. Like I feel that it's almost like brothers not wanting to. I feel like it's three brothers with different ideas about what they want kind of the movie to be like, and not coming out with a script that really sums up anything. And it's also a really amateurish script, I think, is the other big problem to it. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
What actually is kind of cool about it is there's a few things in it that are fairly interesting, but just get swept to the side so quickly. Mainly the plot line involving the West Indian voodoo stuff and that sort of element brought to the vampire thing, and all of the stuff where Rita is apparently Blade, I guess, because she's half vampire, except she doesn't know it.
And she has visions, like prophetic dreams?
I guess. That's because they start talking about, towards the end, about people, don't you want to be somewhere where people take you seriously and don't think you're crazy? And I couldn't remember if where that was coming from. So she had prophetic visions. Is that what the deal was?
Yeah, that's the whole thing with her paintings.
Oh, right.
That she paints things she sees in her dreams to sort of process, because she has these horrible nightmares all the time. And so I wish they had kind of pursued that a little bit more and made use of that and not just made it like, oh, see, she has to be part vampire because she's got dreams.
Yeah,
it's a thing. I guess the Dampiers are the name for a half vampire, half human person. So it's like a thing in vampire stories. A Dampier, yeah.
Dampier?
Yeah,
that sounds made up. It's all made up, but
it is all.
Well, regardless, it's like they had all these kind of interesting ideas that put the focus a lot more on her, but then they were like, oh, but Eddie Murphy is the star of the movie, so we have to make sure he's on screen a lot. So let's push a lot of that stuff to the side and just have her be this generic cop who ends up kind of almost having to be saved by her shitty partner. Her partner,
whose name is Justice, by the way.
Yeah, the chemistry with Angela Bassett and Eddie Murphy was pretty good. The chemistry with Angela Bassett and Justice was fucking terrible.
And how do you not have chemistry with Angela Bassett?
Yeah,
one of the most beautiful women on the planet.
I do have to say, after watching this, because I haven't really, I know very few Angela Bassett movies, but I know she's consistently very good. I feel like she's in line for some sort of later years TV Taken style renaissance, where because she is in this movie anyway, she is ripped.
She's in the Marvel movies. Yeah,
what's that?
She's in the Marvel movies.
Oh, that's right. She was in Black Panther. Yeah. But that doesn't count. I'm talking like give her a gun and send her after somebody.
Charlize Theron her.
Yeah, there you go.
I think I think the real big catastrophic problem for it is what you're saying, Clay, is that Eddie Murphy is the villain of this movie, but he's the main character at the same time.
Yeah.
And
there's a reason why in Dracula movies, Dracula is in it for like 5 minutes.
Right. And I think maybe even more than that, they don't establish Rita as the hero of this story. I don't think.
Right.
She's just kind of there a lot. Like she's an unknowing hero she's an ignorant hero for 90% of it. And then she makes the final decision that kills him at the very end. But he is, for how fundamentally central Eddie Murphy's Maximillian is to this, he is the villain who has no personality and also doesn't really have a very interesting story to go along with him. So he's not doing any kind of work that he needs to do to make this movie do anything. And it's really tough at that point. So you end up with just a story that doesn't really have a hero, and it doesn't seem to have much of a drive to it because you're behind the perspective of the wrong person throughout the whole thing.
There's also, they do so much heavy lifting with voiceover in this movie.
Yeah, and it's mostly Eddie Murphy's voiceover, which again speaks to what Wes was just saying about how strange it is that he's the villain, and yet we're kind of seeing it sort of from his point of view, but he's not. I mean, I know he's supposed to be suave and charismatic in this movie, but he's not, at least in my opinion, I didn't find him charismatic enough that I was sort of rooting for him. Like I didn't want him to win in the end.
Why is this cop falling for a pimp? He dresses like a pimp and walks around like why is she so susceptible to him? That's the problem.
I was thinking that too. I mean, you can hand wave that stuff by he's a vampire and vampires are supernaturally seductive, blah blah blah. But she's half vampire, so she's drawn to her own people or something. I don't know.
Well, but
I'm surprised they didn't have a voiceover where he explains that.
I think it goes down to the tone thing because he's dressed like he's supposed to be a comedy vampire, right? Like he's dressed up in his like cloak and he's got this ridiculous haircut and he's talking in this ridiculous like voice. And but the relationship is not. There's nothing funny about the way that he's sort of pursuing the plot. You know, like the plot is very much a straight ahead vampire thing. So it's this strange thing where it's like a sketch vampire character walked into this movie and everyone is taking him seriously.
Yeah, it occurred to me about halfway through that this movie is just Coming to America, but with vampires.
Yeah.
Because it's essentially the same story about he's coming from wherever to find his queen, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Not as funny as that movie, obviously, but. Although I did get a really good chuckle at the beginning when the boat goes through the thing.
Yes. Yeah.
And Silas is on the boat saying ahoy, and then he's like, ahoy, motherfucker. Opening scene with the boat, I thought that looked great. I read I saw a little clip from an Ebert review where he said this movie was darker than Seven and not like tone-wise, like visually. I actually think this movie looks really nice.
Yeah, I think so.
It looks like a movie shot in 1995.
Yeah.
But it looks fine. I think it's, the cinematography is nice. I thought most of the effects worked really well. That boat sequence was awesome. It's just I don't know. It seems like a lot of people pulling in different directions.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think that it's tough because I think that the comedy is also strange. Like I don't know if we're just getting older or if like the culture has just shifted so rapidly, but it's like I feel like the humor of this movie would be disdained in this day and age. Like I was like, thank God like black people wrote this movie because it's the most like what you would consider to be racist movie in the history. If you were to have a racist write black characters, like in this day and age, wouldn't they kind of look like these guys? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I know what you're saying.
Has the culture changed that much though that it's like just perception of this? Because like if Julius or whatever is just this sort of like fast talking like con artist character, and you'd be like, well, what a caricature of this thing. But it's it's funny that it's only 25 years old, and the movie's humor just feels like it's like from another century or something. And not that I think it's bad. It really struck me. There's lines about like, he goes on an extended riff about a $2 whore and what you can do to a $2 whore. It's like, it feels very...
At the church, yes.
At the church, yeah. Which we can move into The Preacher. I think The Preacher works because the other thing that doesn't really work about this is that the vampire doesn't seem to have a theme to it, although the movie hints at about 5 or 6 different things that could be going on with it. Mm-hmm. Most obviously, there's a blonde woman that he kills in the park towards the end. She says, I feel for the Negro people. Like, I know that you're just under the boot of white capitalism. And so, is that what the movie's about? But The Preacher is the most interesting, and I'll throw it to you. The Preacher is the most interesting to me because he's playing a kind of devil's advocate for the vampire bad aspect, like kind of like a commentary on culture in some ways that I thought was really clever. And they don't do anything else with it. They just have that scene. But I thought he was really doing some like biting satire with the Preacher, but they don't end up really grabbing onto it or anything. It's just that scene.
Yeah, it's they kind of, there's a couple scenes like that. The one with the woman in the park stood out a lot because it seems like that was from a different movie that was going for more of that satire of race relations or whatever she's doing there. It seemed like that I assume there would be more of that if they're going to do that.
Yeah, I think they're saying is that the vampires are black people. The vampires are well, because
your words, not mine, Wes.
No, because he talks about that on the roof when he's talking with Angela Bassett. He says, "Have you ever felt so alone?" And I think what they're saying is being a minority in that world is like to feel that you have a hard time linking up with other people because you're this minority thing who's like downtrodden and like not able to. He has some lines about not being able to like achieve what she wants to or have people think things about you that are not true. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what the film hints at occasionally, but it doesn't really embrace that idea.
Yeah, it definitely leaves a lot of that stuff on the table. And I mean, honestly, maybe it didn't want to get into that because I was thinking about Blackula as I was watching this, and I don't remember Blackula that well, but Blackula is a 70s blaxploitation Dracula movie his name's Blackula. And it almost feels to me like they're trying to not do that kind of thing where it's not like, oh, finally a black guy is a vampire and all of the trappings that come with that sort of like jacking that up to 11. And it kind of not doing that, not taking the opportunity to get into the social commentary stuff just makes it, it feels really flat. And I mean, I don't know. I guess it doesn't have to do that.
No, but I do think it's a missed opportunity because, I was intrigued when I started watching the movie because I thought it was great that the whole central cast is black.
Right.
So it's centering that viewpoint and that experience, and I think they could have done more with that had there not been so many fingers in the pie kind of trying to pull things in different directions. I actually I did a little Googling about this and I found I think it was on a website called Hopes and Fears.
Okay.
Something like that. It was the oral history of Vampire in Brooklyn. Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah.
We love those on this show.
Oh, yeah. And yeah, it was talking about how the two writers who were brought in by the studio to sort of fix up the script. Yeah. We're very young and very inexperienced. And so you've got Charlie Murphy and the other original writer whose name Vernon
Lynch.
Thank you. Vernon Lynch. They wrote it and then these other two guys sort of stepped into it and just started adjusting and tweaking things under the guidance of the studio, which clearly wanted something different than what Eddie Murphy wanted.
Do you know if those writers were black or are they?
I don't know.
Yeah, because that would be like what I would have anticipated was. It seems to me that the script is so amateurish that they probably had bigger story problems than they thought going like early on when they first submitted it. So they bring in writers to kind of shore up the story on some level. But I think if they're white writers, I could see them kind of plastering over a lot of the black humor out of it.
That's a good point.
And if they're black writers, I think it might have gone a different direction with it. I don't know which way it would be or which way it actually worked out for them. But I agree with you that it's a missed opportunity because there's no reason to do this movie this way without playing up that aspect of it because otherwise what do you have? You have some sort of mediocre vampire movie. Who cares?
Yeah,
like why not do
funny.
Something different with it?
Yeah, they don't. Excuse me. Again, they don't go far enough in any direction for it to really make it even kind of like I can understand this becoming sort of a cult favorite, especially for people who maybe saw it when they were younger. It feels like one of those kind of movies, and especially in the Eddie Murphy filmography, it's definitely not the worst movie he's done since then. I did read that this was the last movie he wrote before, or I should say after this, the next movie he wrote, I believe, was Pluto Nash or possibly Norbit. Either one, flip a coin. They're both bad.
Yeah.
It's got some stuff to chuckle at. It's got a couple jokes in it. The horror isn't there, but I can see it being a kind of thing that people would come back to nostalgically at best if it's something that they watched when they were younger, because it's not funny enough to be a classic comedy. It's not scary enough to be a horror movie. There's no social commentary to it to make it stand out that way. It's just sort of like, I mean, it's an hour and 40 minutes.
Well, what's the because I stick with the social commentary aspects stick out so strongly in this that it's weird to me that he's like, if Eddie Murphy wasn't doing such a vanilla role as Maximillian, it almost feels like he was frustrated by the process and then invented these characters to kind of speak these moments that he thought were important. But I don't know. Like, I don't know why you would do that preacher bit if not for you were trying to say something about like what you consider to be the idea of this movie. However, all the stuff that I read and everything that you guys have been talking about, it seems like he just wanted to make a vampire movie at the same time.
I mean, I think the thing with Jerry Hall, the blonde woman in the park, really does stand out. I think because that one's like text, not subtext.
Yeah, she says
the
Negro.
Preacher one.
Yeah.
The Preacher one, you might be reading a bit into too much because it sounded like the way that I perceived that, and from what I read, it sounded like, oh, this was just an excuse for him to do a funny bit more than it was to make like a I mean, who knows? I could be wrong, but
well, I actually
go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Just back to that oral history thing I read, which I should have sent you guys, and I will. But the writers were saying that Eddie Murphy actually made them do rewrites on that preacher bit because there were some things he was not willing to say because of his own religious beliefs.
Really?
Like, he was like, this is not, like, I will not say that. Like, we used to tone it down.
Strange
and
because ass are good.
Strange because it's a pretty aggressive monologue.
Yeah, when I read, like, they had to tone it down, I was like, well, shit, what did you have him saying before?
I think, I don't know, like, it's one of those complicated movie stories where the preacher bit seems to me to be so satirical and pointed about what he's talking about, where he is a vampire playing up the bad aspects of society that he thinks are judging him as a vampire. Like, the commentary there is that, who are you to say that you're good? Because look at all these things that I'm flipping around. He says, like, you're like, how hypocritical are you about ass? He's like, ass is good, but why are you free? Like, if there was no ass, none of you would be around here at this point. Mm-hmm. And I just got the distinct impression he was trying to play up the judging the vampire thing, which at that point is kind of a stand-in for black culture, in terms of how society's looking at them. And it seems like it's not that deep, but it's like all the signs are pointing to this direction that this is what he wanted to do, and he just didn't want to do it at like at the finish line. He's just like, no, abandon it or whatever. But it's I don't know. It's strange. If there isn't that point to it, I'm shocked that so many of those references remain in the film at the end of it.
Yeah, some of it I wonder if it's like you just if you do something like this, if you take this concept and you do it long enough, you're going to back into a couple of these things. You know, like that. I'm not saying that you're wrong, that it wasn't intentional, but if I could see some of that stuff just being stuff they happened to trip into versus something they were actually trying to do. And again, if they were actually trying to do that, they didn't really, I don't know where it got lost in translation. This doesn't, it's weird because this is, from all that I saw, it was a movie that they didn't really want to make, because I read that, Eddie Murphy only did it because Paramount said they would release the rights to the Nutty Professor if he made this movie.
Yeah.
So that right there is not a good start. And it comes at a really weird time for the careers of Eddie Murphy and Wes Craven, because Vampire in Brooklyn was 1995. Wes Craven's New Nightmare was 1994, which was his big return to the Freddy Krueger franchise, which is actually a really good movie, but nobody saw. And then the next year, Wes Craven makes Scream and Eddie Murphy makes Nutty Professor, which are two huge movies for both of them.
Yep.
So it's a really strange pit stop in their career.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a strange, if it's that though, if it's just a movie that they had to do to get it out of the way, it seems strange to pair them together. I wonder if that really impacts. I guess we should just move back more to the substance of the film, because it seems like everything about like trying to figure out what was going on behind the scenes.
We're just three-way confused about what's supposed to be happening.
Screaming into the void.
Yeah. But I think that, I guess otherwise there's really not much. It's tough. Like, I so desperately wanted it to be about something that it ends up not being there is a strange thing.
It's surprisingly plotty too, and that's where it really fell apart for me. I mean, well, all things considered, because Eddie Murphy was kind of fun sometimes to watch on screen, I guess. You got the preacher thing, you got the Italian guy thing. The ghoul was funny, but any time that they got into like the plot, it just stopped making sense. Like, when Eddie Murphy picks up the Rita's roommate, and then they spend the night having sex, and then Rita gets up, and at some point in the night, her roommate has completely moved out of the apartment, taken everything with her, and left a note that said, "I'm moving in with this other guy," and Rita's just like, ugh. Typical.
There goes the rent. Yeah.
Yeah. Every time that they did stuff like that, it was not. It seemed like they were really stretching for some sort of story thread.
Yeah, because they have that plot thread about her mother killed herself or something, right? And the father,
yeah, because she was crazy.
Yeah, the father wasn't a vampire or something, was he? Was he the vampire?
Yeah, the father was a vampire.
Father was the vampire.
And then they did that thing later with the Van Helsing voodoo kind of character.
Yeah.
Where the Justice goes to talk to him, and they start talking about the mother, and then all of a sudden he's like, "I was in love with her." What? It feels like they're desperately grasping for a story bit.
Yeah, there's a similar beat when Maximillian says to Rita, your father sent me to you.
Yeah.
Doesn't he say? I feel like he says something like that.
Something
and it's like, we're meant to be. Your father wanted us to be together. Your father sent me to you, or something like that. Which was just like, oh, why didn't you lead with that?
Yeah. What? It's just one of those things where if I'm sitting back and I'm like looking at this script and I go, well, why does she need to be half vampire? Is that just so that's the impetus for him to find her?
I think,
because if that's it's like they do a lot of lifting to try and make that worth anything.
Well, I think that they're implying right at the start of this that the hunters have basically wiped out vampires to this point. It's surprising there are no vampire hunters in this movie. But I think that the story is he has been hunted to the point where he is like one of the last few vampires, and he needs her to repopulate the vampire population.
Oh, I see. Okay.
That was my understanding of what was going on. I might be wrong, but because they have the opening voiceover about like the European hunters have spread us across the earth, and he went to the Caribbean and ended up then going to New York. Yes. So I assume that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, but it does play very fast and loose with kind of vampire lore. Like the movie doesn't do a great job of laying out sort of like what are the rules for these vampires. Like in this world, like garlic bad. I think there is a scene where it's like, go get this out of here.
Yeah, in the Italian restaurant, he starts knocking garlic.
But he can touch it. It's not like painful for him. He's just like, ugh.
Yeah.
And so
sunlight plays a very, very little role in this, interestingly.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that interesting. And then, like, Wes, what you were saying about he needs to find her so they can sort of save their species, I guess you would say. But, like, does that imply that these vampires make baby vampires?
Yeah, apparently. Yeah, you have to have baby vampire.
Apparently, you can make a half vampire.
Yeah, I guess so. And then
you mean?
Yeah. No, I mean her, Rita.
Yeah.
She's the product of a...
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Dampier. Isn't he a flute player?
My favorite vampire weakness scene was when he walks into the church and his hair starts smoking.
Oh, God, that was good. That was really funny.
Yeah, that scene was legitimately good because it's a instance that is unlike anything you will see in another vampire movie, because they give him this power of being able to turn into people, which is generally not something vampires do. And they use it very effectively by having him do that scene where he plays the preacher, obviously in the church, can't go in the church, so, got to go outside and, X, Y, and Z. Less effectively, I mean, it's still fun, but it feels less novel than the Italian sequence feels less novel than the preacher sequence.
Yeah.
But yeah, they add stuff, they take stuff away. It's and to kind of to touch back on something I said in the last episode. I'm aware that Blackula came out before Near Dark, but Blackula has so much based in previous vampire mythology and stuff. It's called Blackula.
Mm-hmm.
That I don't consider it as original a work as original an American vampire movie as Near Dark is, but I feel like this had the potential to be that kind of movie, and they just don't do that.
To be like an American vampire movie?
Yeah, like they have them do their own thing, have them create their own mythology, and have them put their own sort of subtext and stuff to it, but they just kind of,
copy the tropes. Yeah. That's my big problem with it, because I'm putting in a lot of stock in if you're going to do this Eddie Murphy thing and they're angling it from like the Black Caribbean vampire experience, and they're bringing that up and making it a part of everything, to have it fit so snugly into the tropes of like white European vampire stories,
right?
Doesn't seem to do anything for it. It's like it feels like a sketch at that point. It's like an SNL idea of like, let's have Eddie Murphy play the noble vampire role, and like that'll be funny for whatever reason. But instead they do this thing where instead of embracing it, they go into that European stuff, and that story is just not interesting because it's so generic and boring, and like nothing that is any of the strengths of any of the cast or writers of this stuff are aiming for. So it just falls flat. And I think it's really a missed opportunity because this movie's not as bad as they say it is. I think it has funny bits in it. The dog, when he explodes the dog into the water.
Aww.
How? Mostly because I'm like in full blown like anti how people treat their pets in this day and age. That maybe like when was the last time we had a movie where someone blew up a dog? It struck me as that kind of a thing. Yeah. But like I feel it was a wasted opportunity, even though the movie did hold my attention.
Yeah, and speaking of like the blowing up the dog scene, and there are these absolutely insane moments in this movie that I really wonder if they had leaned more into that, like just kind of going a little further off the rails and not trying to adhere to like the European nobility vampire, like the traditional kind of love story of I'm gonna get this beautiful woman and get her into my thrall. And I'm going to like, if there had been more sort of just out there stuff, I feel like even if they didn't go for a deeper social commentary, that would have at least made it more interesting.
Yeah.
Because I was surprised at how often during this movie I felt bored.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the worst thing about it is that it's just kind of boring.
That's completely the Maximillian character's fault. Like,
Yeah.
it's just a bad central character to have. Eddie Murphy was concerned about his hair. He said that the wig was the reason people didn't like it. I think his hair looks fantastic, actually, but
it's definitely
Wes, no.
it definitely doesn't look as bad as everybody else thinks it does.
I don't know. It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. Like, they could have, even if he had shown up, like, come out of the coffin looking like that, and then been like, I need to fit in more in this modern place, and gotten a haircut.
yeah, haircut
Sure.
is the thing that's missing. Yeah.
It would have been like,
I'm
great.
actually shocked that they don't do that.
give him a makeover scene.
Yeah, that's very much the vampire in the modern era. The first thing he does is get a new suit or something.
Yeah, you have the montage of him getting a new suit, a whole black suit and everything, and sunglasses, and he cuts his hair, and he comes out. He's still talking like that, but at least he's ready for the new world in New York or whatever.
So, what if they made this movie 10 years prior, and Eddie Murphy plays the ghoul character role, and it becomes more, and the story is more about that character than the boring vampire?
Who's the
then
vampire?
I think I don't know, someone. Rutger Hauer, I don't know.
So is it another? See, that I could see Eddie Murphy playing that role. Although I think the guy who plays the ghoul is good in this movie.
No, it's not that he's bad. It's just I feel like what you were saying is true, that the vampire in Vampire in Brooklyn is very boring and not adding anything to the movie. If they had shifted if they had put the star in the secondary role and shifted the focus to that character, because he does at the end turn into a fly-looking vampire.
Yeah,
Which I was so confused because, okay, so you don't have to be born a vampire. You can be made a vampire.
Mm-hmm.
By a ring? He put on a ring.
Sure. Yep.
Well,
and
he says there's lore. There's some kind of thing where after he bites him, he says, like, if you're a good ghoul, I'll turn you into a vampire.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I guess the ring is the way to do that. Although that's never really said. I would have expected something else to come out of it.
Yeah.
But
I think it's just a tag they put on the end of the movie.
yeah, just
like a fun bit to do at the end. Like we need one other thing to happen before we.
Well, Clay, I think that I would agree with, like, if you were to reconfigure this and to make the vampire not be the main character of the story, but have it be the ghoul, and Eddie Murphy plays the ghoul character, and the vampire is just kind of a character who exists that the ghoul is trying to accomplish the rest of the movie for, like he's trying to do the bidding of that character. And then you can have something like he falls in love with Rita or something like that. Like he's got a little bit more agency and story drive behind him or something like that. And then the vampire has to fight him or something at the end. But it's just, I chalk it up to an amateurish screenwriting team who, I don't know if they wrote before this, but it seems, especially the cop dialogue is terrible.
Oh, it's awful.
It's awful.
Real bad.
It's really, really bad. So it sticks out to me when they write dialogue like that and they have this story that they don't seem to know who the protagonist should be. They're just confused about how to write an effective screenplay.
Yeah, it's like you've got Eddie Murphy in the movie. The movie has to be about Eddie Murphy.
Yeah.
But the story is not about the Eddie Murphy character.
Right.
The
problem is
Yeah.
Eddie Murphy wants to be the vampire. So you're like, well, now what do I do? Like, I have to.
Yeah. It's like when they made Terminator Salvation and they cast Christian Bale as John Connor, who originally was in it for like 2 or 3 minutes. And then all of a sudden, we have Christian Bale. We got to do more with John Connor now.
What's interesting about John Connor? Someone tell me about John Connor.
Yeah, I don't know. He's got a scar on his face.
What'd you guys like about the movie? What'd you think it did pretty effectively, if anything, that we haven't talked about?
I mean, I think we kind of at least touched on most of the things that I enjoyed about it. I think visually it was good looking. Like, I think the effects were, especially for the time, done pretty well.
Looks of an era to me. Like,
it does,
which is not a bad thing, I don't think, but it's certainly of this era where films looked like this a lot, and Wes Craven films in particular look like this.
Yeah. So I appreciated that, and I did enjoy those sort of, like, the very, like, gallows humor moments that did come out from time to time. But I mean, beyond that, I don't have much good to say about it.
I like the vampire effects. I think they look pretty good.
Yeah, I think Eddie Murphy in full vampire face at the end looked a lot like the demon from the musical episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. You're not going to understand what that means, Wes, but some people will.
I do.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought some of the comedy stuff was okay. Oh, I should say some of the comedy stuff was good. A lot of it felt like it was reaching. I thought it looked good. It does look like a movie made in 1995. The thing, it kind of said two things to me about Wes Craven as a filmmaker, which is, one, he's actually better than a lot of his peers in that horror specific genre. There's a lot of those guys who unfortunately aren't really that good. They've done like one or two movies that really hit it, but anytime if you see a movie and their name pops up, it's kind of going to be a mixed bag as far as like performances and visuals and stuff. However, so basically Wes Craven he's a very solid filmmaker. However, he doesn't really have a visual style. It's very like this movie. If you told me that this movie was directed by any other director from 1995 who was not Steven Spielberg and not David Fincher or whatever, I would say I would totally believe it. There's not anything.
You wouldn't say that Craven has. I think of Craven. How would I describe him? I would describe him as he's similar to Verhoeven in that he kind of likes to have this sort of fake aesthetic to things. Like all of his films, like the sets and everything, look a little bit fake. Like he doesn't like super realistic stuff.
Well, if that's true, that's really interesting because his first handful of movies were very realistic feeling.
Yeah,
like his first movie was it Last House on the Left, which is very gritty and in your face. Even Nightmare on Elm Street looks pretty legit as far as like realism goes. I probably only associate him from like his mid '80s stuff onward. Like even Children Under the Stairs or whatever that is called is like it's not the setup in the universe of that world is not real to me. Like, and that's not really the point. He's not going for that, but I always think of Craven as like it's clearly like a body puppet flying through the wall through the air when things go. Like it looks like stuff like that. And the other funny thing about Craven to me is for a master of horror, I don't think he's particularly scary as a filmmaker, which is kind of his unique thing to me about what Wes Craven does, where he's not he doesn't have like that visceral terror. He doesn't really do jump scares all that much or anything like that. Right. Maybe he does, and I'm just not thinking about it. But when I think about things like Nightmare on Elm Street, I don't think about like horrific stuff that has me hiding putting my hands over my eyes or anything like that. Well, Nightmare on Elm Street's got a decent amount of that stuff in it, I'd say.
You think so? I don't associate that with him.
We'll have a chance to talk about it, right?
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a few days. And I mean, well, I would push back against that using Scream specifically.
Yeah, that's what I kept thinking of.
Because the first 10 minutes of Scream were like some of the most brutal stuff I had seen ever at that point. The first time I saw that, like,
scared the hell out of me when I was a kid.
Maybe that'll end up. I mean, that probably makes sense to be the B-real movie to talk about.
But you don't think that's just because you're a kid at that age? Like when you watch Scream now, you realize how funny that scene is. You know what I mean?
I mean, it ends with Drew Barrymore hanging from a tree with her guts hanging out.
Right, but the killer
doesn't really read as funny to me.
The killer's not effective in that opening. Like he is, it's the thing where it's a funny phone call. They're talking in sort of a Tarantino-esque way about like what things are going on. Like I just don't. If you were to tell me like what's a scary movie, I wouldn't say that Scream is particularly scary to me either, I guess. But maybe I'm just more specific in what I find scary, but I'm usually scared of everything, so I don't know why I wouldn't find Wes Craven stuff to be scary.
That's interesting. I wonder how much of that is time. Because I remember at the time that movie being very, very scary. I think you're probably right though. I mean, maybe we can save this for the Scream discussion, but going back to his style, I know what you mean, and I think that kind of falls under what I'm talking about, where he doesn't really have that much of a discernible style. Because Nightmare on Elm Street is very specific. It's got a very specific look, very specific scares, et cetera, et cetera. The story is very specific. Everything else that he does isn't really that specific. So I don't feel like let's put it this way, because I'm scrambling to try and find something to say.
Well, he has an eye for iconic. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, if you show up to a John Carpenter movie, you can watch that and go, that's a John Carpenter movie, whether it's music or the way it's shot or if it's a horror movie, the way the scares work and whatnot. Same thing with David Cronenberg. Same thing with a lot of these guys. I don't think you can really do that with Wes Craven.
I think Wes Craven kind of has periods. Like I think there's been sort of like a I hesitate to call it an evolution because I don't know if you would that evolution sounds like I'm assigning like a value judgment, like, oh, his later stuff is better, and I don't necessarily agree with that.
Sure.
But I think he adapts. I think he adapts to sort of like if certain styles or visual cues are a little bit more popular at the time.
Yep.
I think he does a very good job of weaving them into what he's doing. Like, I actually do visually see some similarities, strangely enough, between Vampire in Brooklyn and some of the Scream movies. Like in Scream 1, like I think back kind of to what Wes was saying, there's sort of like a veneer over everything. Like everything looks a little proppy, a little too polished, a little too...
Proppy is a good way to describe it. I would say he's a man. I would say that even if he doesn't do a lot of prop work, props are what sticks to what I think of when I think of his movies. Which
is so fascinating because when I think of his movies, I think of first Nightmare on Elm Street, which is very much not that. And even Last House on the Left, which is very much not that. So it's interesting that he did end up going in that direction.
Well, but doesn't Nightmare has the scene where the girl gets sucked into the bed, though, right?
Johnny Depp gets sucked into
Johnny Depp gets sucked into the bed.
That beautiful, beautiful girl, Johnny Depp.
Because I kind of associate that scene with what I'm talking about for Craven's style, which is that it seems proppy, for lack of a better term. Like there's something, he's like, cut a hole in the bed, we'll pull him through the bed, and that'll be the thing. And that's really what I see as his defining thing. What would you say that he does best? Like, what makes him a great filmmaker? Not that I'm disagreeing. I'm just curious because I have seen a lot of Wes Craven movies, but I don't know if I could really identify anything about them besides the fact that they've all become... To me, what he seems really good at is he's good at making iconic characters for whatever reason. Like the Krueger design and the Scream Ghostface design are two like very famous character designs at this point. And
Shocker.
Oh God!
Played by Mitch Pileggi, who has a
oh my God! When he
when he
popped up as one of the mobsters in this movie, I was just like,
and the other guy, Tony. See, that's a joke too. That is like they don't even like lean on it enough for it to be a joke.
That's
when he's
Anthony's.
like, Tony. He's like, I'm not Tony. I'm Anthony. This is Tony. And the other guy, Anthony, is one of the kids from Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh, that's fun.
It's all coming together.
Yeah.
I forgot what we're talking about. Iconic characters.
What does Craven do well?
I think he's just he's one of those guys that I think you're right. I think he's hit it out of the horror park enough times, iconic wise, to put him on the Mount Rushmore or Mount Everest. You need a big space for these people.
He's still up there to this day.
Yeah. On the Mount Rushmore of horror guys. But like, I think if you really had to get into it, I think he's a good filmmaker at best. I don't know if I would say he is like a technical film master.
Because now I'm thinking about it, I think his sense of humor is what sets him apart from his contemporaries.
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah. Yes, he is very funny.
And something I like going back a little bit to his visual style and my wonderful use of the new word proppy. I think there's something he does in a lot of his films it kind of touches on that like uncanny valley feeling.
Sure.
Where it's like something is wrong in this picture, even when nothing horrifying is on screen. Like, I don't know. Maybe that's just my take on him, where everything just feels... In a lot of his movies, things always feel slightly off. And I wonder if that isn't a little bit intentional. Like, because it is vaguely
Is that what he did to this movie? He's like, I'll just make a semi-bad movie and have everything feel off. But would you say that you feel that sensibility in Vampire?
I think so, because visually it doesn't, it's supposed to be, it's Vampire in Brooklyn, but it doesn't feel really like Brooklyn. It doesn't feel like New York.
All the walls that have spray paint are covered in spray paint.
Yeah, and there's three cars on the street at any given moment, and they're like not the right make and models for the time.
They only did 3 days of shooting in New York City. Yeah, the rest was in
that
LA
was
on
it.
Sets,
yeah. There we go. But yeah, I don't know. So maybe part of it's that, and I'm just trying to read into it.
That makes sense. I mean,
but
if you're saying that Carpenter's thing is this weird veneer of reality, he does that through shooting a movie. Oh, sorry, did I say Carpenter? Craven.
I think so.
If you say that his decision to shoot this on set fits into that for me, I don't know if that's his choice or if he just ended up doing that because it was cheaper or whatever. But that adds a sense of fakeness to it. The fact that it is Eddie Murphy is dressed this way in this movie, like the fact that this character doesn't seem to make sense, kind of feels like it's that kind of a thing of like a skewed reality sense. And the fact that they are ever so slightly playing with this European vampire story also kind of makes sense. But it doesn't seem like he had any input on the script. But at the same time, I would say that this feels very much like a Craven movie to me. It's just, it's maybe not his best and it's not his worst, I don't think, but it's somewhere in there. It feels like he had some fingerprints on it, including the comedy and stuff like that.
Well, I don't know, because it feels like to me, Eddie Murphy decided he wanted to make a vampire movie, and then they were like, who's a good horror director?
Yeah.
And Wes Craven happened to be available. I don't know. It doesn't, I don't feel a style thumbprint. I mean, maybe it's just that I'm not looking in the right place for it. I don't know.
Yeah, I just don't know. I probably don't know enough about Craven, but that's the. I could, after we watch Nightmare, I'll be interested to see how my idea lines up, because this to me felt in some bizarre way similar to how I feel about Nightmare, like how that movie sits in my sort of like mind's eye about what I think about it.
You know what actually might be a good B-roll to do actually then would be Wes Craven's New Nightmare, because we would have those back to back, and you have the original version, which is sort of Wes Craven, prime, where it's a little bit more gritty, and then you've got some of the same characters, the same idea, set in 1996 or 1994 Wes Craven, which is a lot more closer to this. Maybe that would be an interesting comparison.
Yeah, yeah. There's no Eddie Murphy in that one, though, unfortunately, right? Do we have any other thoughts about Vampire, or should we just take a break and then we'll come back with final thoughts?
Anything else, Amanda?
I am just so befuddled by this movie. I just don't know where to go anymore.
We'll take a break,
motherfucker.
We'll take a break to let you catch your thoughts. We'll play an audio clip from the movie, then we'll come back and give our final thoughts.
Drink the wine you've never tasted.
Yes.
I can give it to you, Rita. A world where no one laughs at you for what you feel, and what you see, what you are. All you have to do is just say. Say the word. Say it.
Yes.
I don't know if I've talked myself into liking this movie over the course of this conversation.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, it's not terrible.
No, it's not like a miserable experience to watch it. It's just sort of a mildly entertaining and oftentimes confusing one.
Yeah, I think it suffers the most from the people who are at the forefront of it, Eddie Murphy and Wes Craven, and the time in their career where they made it, because it seemed like it was like right on the edge of them having a big upswing, but they weren't really firing it on. They weren't having the success they had before. So you've got that thing. You're in that dip where it's like, oh, Eddie Murphy's got a new movie. Hopefully it's great, and then it's only okay. So then you're like, oh, that movie sucked. I don't know. That's what I have to think. It's something like that, because it's fine. It's not terrible. It's not amazing. If it's on TNT while I'm vacuuming, I'll leave it on.
A glowing endorsement if I've ever heard one.
I thought his Wes Craven's lowest movie was going to be Cursed, which, have you seen that?
I know, I don't know that one.
Cursed is a werewolf movie, and from everything that I've read about it, it is absolute dog shit.
But
yeah.
Did that come out in the 80s?
No, it came out, I want to say early 2000s.
Oh, okay. It's a recent movie.
More recent, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I would just wrap it up by saying it feels, maybe I'm digging too deep into this, and it was just kind of a cash grab, get us out of this contract with Paramount or whoever he was signed with at that point to free up the Nutty Professor. Craven's got a free 2 months in between projects, and he's like, I need a paycheck. Let me see what I can do here. Maybe that's there, but at the same time, it feels like what they assembled should have been something more than this, and that there was these bones of it supposed to be about something, or like...
I think someone should remake it.
Probably, yeah.
I think if you remade it now with an eye towards really getting into some of the social aspects of it, you could make a really interesting movie.
Idris Elba plays the vampire.
Jordan Peele, get on.
Oh my God.
Put all of your other stuff aside. Use the cachet that you've built.
Oh God.
Having the two highest grossing horror movies in the past 20 years to do a remake of Vampire in Brooklyn. You're welcome.
I don't know. I enjoyed watching it while simultaneously realizing it wasn't good. I liked some of the comedy. I liked the ghoul character. I liked some of the jokes that Eddie Murphy would occasionally seem like he was unable to control himself for making a joke in a couple of the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. Angela Bassett is great. She seems to be taking it extremely seriously.
She's great, but I feel like you can also tell where she doesn't even know what's going on.
Yeah.
Because there's some scenes where her performance is kind of all over the place, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't think she knows what's happening. I don't mean that like as a shot towards her. I think it's just I don't think she knows what's going on because nobody else does.
Well, yeah. I think on top of that, I mean, not to bring it way down, but there was a really tragic, like her stunt woman died.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
I saw that.
On set, I'm pretty sure, if I am remembering correctly, fairly early in
what
the
stunt?
process.
I couldn't think of a stunt where she flew through the air.
I don't know if they ended up using it in
the
film. I'm trying to remember, but from what I was reading, it was about her falling off a building.
Yeah, it was like a 40-foot fall or something.
Yeah. So I mean, I could kind of see if she was a little, shaken by that, or it sort of had a ripple effect across, the rest of the project for her. So.
But yeah, generally I agree. I think she's really, I mean, she is good. Full stop.
Yeah.
I don't know why maybe she was a bigger star. I don't know. I feel like I'm surprised that she was not a bigger star.
I remember in Boys in the Hood, she's the mother.
Yeah. Yeah, she did. She had like a handful of stuff that was fairly well received, but she's always good.
Yeah.
Give me that Angela Bassett and a gun avenging the death of her husband.
Amanda, any final thoughts about this one? I don't think you gave. I think me and Clay have talked about it. What's your final takeaway?
I agree a lot with what you guys have been saying through the course of this, of that I think it's too bad because this movie got confused like when they were creating it. I think too many different people wanted it to be different things and sort of were pulling it in different directions. And so without that sort of unified message and point of view, it just got really, really muddled. I wish they had decided, is this a scary movie? Is this a comedy? Are we going to go deeper into a social commentary? Or are we just trying to sort of have some fun scares or some good jokes? I wish they'd done a better job of centering, Angela Bassett's character as the hero, as like the main character, which would have been nice. But I know with Eddie Murphy, you kind of can't.
Yeah.
You can't do that. And I thought, there's that weird pivot when she's sort of half becoming a vampire / not quite there, and her partner sort of becomes the hero all of a sudden.
Yeah, that's a weird twist. Yeah,
it was very, and it was just, it felt so unnecessary, and
I wish she had killed him.
or Max had killed him, or
or
like
something.
Then she could have avenged him or something.
Yeah.
But I just think it was a huge mistake to shift it even further off of her and onto this guy who was just sort of like fine. But
So we haven't really talked about this, but I guess it's probably good. I'm sorry we're wrapping up and we hadn't talked about this before, but how do you guys feel about horror comedies in general? I'm not talking about like Dracula Dead and Loving It. Like the idea that a movie can be both.
Let's talk about Dracula.
I mean, we can when we get to Leslie Nielsen movies. I'm sure that's going to probably be close to the bottom. But like the idea of like a movie, say like Evil Dead 2 or something like that, where it can be scary and it can be funny. Because I know some people don't like that.
I mean, I enjoy it.
Yeah.
I just think it has to be. You have to really commit. You have to decide that that's where you're going and go. And that's kind of what I was trying to get at earlier, where I almost wish this had been more like that. Like it had just gone like, all right, we're just going to go completely off the wall with this and have like, maybe like some over the top, like gory moments or just like more exploding dogs flying into rivers or whatever. So I think it can be really, really fun and enjoyable if everybody decides this is what we're doing, this is the movie we're making, and sort of leans way into it. But I think if you sort of dabble in it a little bit like this does and then pull away back again, it doesn't work.
Wes?
I find pure horror to be more of an accomplishment than a horror comedy. Like the most successful horror comedy is not as much of an accomplishment as I think a purely scary horror movie is in a lot of ways. I think it's because the tone of horror, like if you start adding jokes into a horror movie, it stops being as scary as it could potentially be. Does that make sense? Like even I think you can't do something like Hereditary, which I think is like terrifying. If they start joking around in that movie, because the jokes will just distract from the overall tone of the movie that they're trying to do.
I think Hereditary is actually pretty funny, but I think that's part of why it works so well. Because it's so funny. It's so funny because the stuff that's happening is hysterically over the top, but it's played so straight that you feel really fucking weird about laughing at it.
I don't think anyone would classify it as a comedy, I guess.
Right.
Like, there's no jokes in it. I think that I don't really have a problem with horror comedy, but I think I'd rather just watch a straight horror movie than something like a horror comedy, like Tucker and Dale. I know that movie gets good reviews, and I enjoyed it, but it's not like I'm going to go rewatch it, I don't think.
Sure. Well, the reason I ask is because it feels like this should have worked with these two guys together. The concept of you can have a movie that is both scary and funny, but it for whatever reason, I think you're right, Amanda. I think it's a commitment thing where they couldn't commit in either direction to it. So it ends up just feeling really lukewarm, which also, again, is interesting if you compare it to Scream, which is very successful in being both really scary and really funny.
That might be my defining takeaway about Wes Craven, which is which is why I'm maybe not crazy about him, but I respect his position because he kind of positioned himself as that guy. Like that's his zone to exist in there. And just because I, for whatever reason, prefer pure horror, he kind of he doesn't sit on my like list of what I would put on the Mount Rushmore of horror directors. I don't think, even though I like him, it's strange. I don't know, personal taste, I guess.
Well, it's funny as I think we'll see getting into Nightmare on Elm Street. That movie is not. It's got some funny moments, but they play it fairly straight, or at least the jokes are fairly dry. And Freddy himself is kind of funny.
No, that's the problem. Yeah, I think Krueger is a little bit too funny, almost. Not the
well. The first one, I don't think he's too funny. I think the first one, the jokes that he makes are just straight up twisted jokes with the intention of fucking with the kids.
Yeah.
It's after that where they decided to make him a pun machine.
Yeah.
Where he just turns into a joke.
Yes.
So, Nightmare on Elm Street, I think it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about.
Yeah. We'll see when we get there. I would because I like Nightmare on Elm Street, and I like Freddy in that one. But I think that we'll talk about when we get there. I think that Freddy Krueger, as designed in that movie, even in the original one, is a Craven take. Like he's very much a Wes Craven character, I guess, in the way that he is and everything. So I guess we'll call it a day there. That's it for Vampire in Brooklyn, which was on Amazon Prime, so I didn't have to buy it. But I'm sure I will go back and rewatch it. I'll get the 4K Blu-ray for this one. I don't know. Anything else to say, or I guess we're done at this point. So thank you guys for coming on and talking about Vampire in Brooklyn. Amanda, thanks for coming on again.
Thank you. It was good to be here.
We'll be back with Nightmare on Elm Street, which will be our next one, which is much more highly rated and much more well-regarded, I think. We'll see when we get there, and then we'll decide on the B-roll whether or not we want to continue with the Krueger nightmares or we want to go with Scream. But there's a lot of stuff to choose from. So if you enjoyed the show, patreon.com/the Pensky Files is the best way to support us. You can go to all the Facebook, Twitter, Discord links down below. And I think that's it. Clay, do you have anything you want to say before we sign off?
Welcome to prime time, bitch. No, I'm sorry. He didn't make that one. That was the third one.
Favorite ghoul in Hollywood history, I think, has to go to this guy who is my favorite ghoul. When his hand falls off when he's washing the car, that's good comedy right there.
I kind of was hoping that when he was going up against Justice at the end, I was hoping Justice was going to kick him and he was just going to explode like into pieces. I thought that would have been great.
He's for how horrible he looks, he's surprisingly well received by everyone in the city.
Yeah. Everyone seems very calm when he's around.
I don't think they make a single drug joke about it either, which is what I
don't.
No, yeah.
Oh, he has the dropsy.
Yeah, the dropsy. Guys, thank you very much for listening. We'll be back in a couple days, I think. Maybe I'll speak now, but I'll regret what I'm going to say. But we'll be back whenever we come back with Nightmare on Elm Street. See ya.